Hi everybody, my name's Joanne Bendel and I'm from the New South Wales Clinical Excellence Commission. We've put together this slide presentation because of the number of requests that we've had in regards to the implementation and the ongoing commitment that's required for compliance with Australian Standard, New Zealand Standard 4187-2014 and how to prepare for accreditation with this standard. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we are meeting today. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and it is upon their lands that we meet today. So let's just start with a very simple definition. So what is reprocessing? Which is part of what the standard is all about. So reprocessing is all of the activities required to ensure that a used, reusable medical device is safe for its intended use. Even though AS 4187 has been around since the end of 2014, we still have ongoing challenges with the standard. And those ongoing challenges include our understanding of what is required. The language is very technical and people find it difficult to interpret that technical language and put that into practical information that can be implemented down at the technical level. And so there is still these ongoing debates around some of the interpretation around some of those criteria within the standard. One of the biggest issues is around the governance arrangements with the implementation across all reprocessing areas. And particularly if you're looking at reprocessing areas within a local health district, a sector, or a health facility, there will be a number of reprocessing areas, so from a sterilising department to an endoscopy suite, to a medical imaging that's doing transvaginal probes, to a dental clinic. And the issue is with those governance arrangements is because all have different reporting and management functions. And oftentimes there is no forum where all of those groups can come together unless it is implemented to be able to discuss and implement the standard. Because a lot of those reprocessing areas, they'll have a combination of both clinical and corporate functions, and clinical and corporate managers who will be responsible for reprocessing. And not everybody understands reprocessing from that kind of governance level right down to that very technical level about cleaning and disinfection and sterilizing. So it's very difficult to be able to sort of grasp that information if you've never had anything to do with it before. Also, there have been even some demarcation issues because often the people who are managing the reprocessing activities, particularly in central sterilising departments, are different from that, where the majority of sterile stock of RMDs are held, and that's generally in operating theatres, and they have two separate managers. And so oftentimes people see that as part of two separate functions rather than a continuous line of what is included in reprocessing. Because of the increasing costs around the standards, initially I think the standard for all of them, which were well over 30 of standards that are required to implement AS 4187, were around about $2,500, and now that suite of standards are nearly $10,000 or maybe more now. And also, because it's been going on well over 7 years now, or nearly 7 years, there's been some ongoing accreditation requirements, and it's been quite difficult for people to continually sustain the effort that's required to do the implementation, and particularly where they're coming from areas that have had an enormous number of gaps. And if they have to rebuild sterilising departments and then sort of build all the other quality management systems and governance and all of that education, it's quite difficult to sustain that effort over long periods of time. The Australian Commission of Safety and Quality in Healthcare have had a number of advisories regarding the implementation and what is required for accreditation for AS4187, and they have had constant reviews because what is written and people's interpretation and what that actually means at the practical level, it has to be absolutely precise and black and white, or otherwise it is open to interpretation, and people still do not understand how it is to be implemented. There's also the expectation versus reality of what people can do, and oftentimes if you're in a single, in a small sort of rural facility where you have one operating theatre, you have a small sterilising department, you will probably have one CSD technician. But then what is the expectation of what that person is able to do? And oftentimes they're unable to do a gap analysis. They're unable to write action and implementation plans and set up quality management systems. And so oftentimes those people are the technical experts, but they're not the decision makers. We've probably spent more on the implementation and improvements around AS4187 than it has ever been, provided finance for, and there's still a number of ongoing costs to comply with the standard, and costs have increasing, so much. Even one organisation I know that even the cost of the wraps that they use in the sterilising department because of COVID increased by about 150% during that period of time. So these are all ongoing costs that are mandatory that you have these things, but they're still an ongoing cost. And still, we still hear from a number of people is about where is the evidence that underpins AS4187, and where is that scientific evidence that states that it had previously caused a problem, and by implementing all these things, that do we have a better way or a more effective, or is it a safer way without the reprocessing of our reusable medical devices? So for accreditation, you need to have a number of things in place for accreditation. One is that you will need to have a governance structure that looks after the reprocessing, and I've got a whole section on that we're going to talk about. The same with quality management systems and action plans, because you need to be able to track progress for that gap analysis and how you are addressing those gaps within your plans. Oftentimes in those action plans, there's a considerable amount that's put in there around infrastructure to try and sort of correct workflows and air handling systems and equipment requirements. These are all big, major infrastructure costs, and oftentimes it requires either a rebuild of a sterilising department or an endoscopy unit, or they require major refurbishment to get that workflow correct. So let's go and have a look at accreditation. So within the national accreditation, Action 3.14 of the national standards is very specific around, where reusable equipment, instruments and devices are used. The health service organisation has to have processes for reprocessing that are consistent with relevant national and international standards, and also in conjunction with the manufacturer's guidelines or recommendations. You also need a traceability process for critical and semi-critical equipment, instruments and devices that are capable of identifying the patient, the procedure, the reusable equipment, instruments and devices that were used for the procedure. Because of that intensity around the traceability process, oftentimes in smaller places, they have a paper-based traceability program or tracking system. But as you have more and more reusable medical devices, a lot of people are moving into electronic tracking systems because they're easier to manage. You can put more information in it. You can add all of your photographs, you can add all your testing. And so it becomes kind of this very sort of huge database, but also as a tracking and traceability program. But within the national standards, when they developed version 2 of the national standards, they removed a lot of the duplication. And so everybody has kind of like their primary standard, but still there are other parts of the standard that you need to look at to see some of the other parts that you need to comply with. So even though 3.14 around reprocessing is in the preventing and controlling healthcare associated infection standard, you also need to look at the clinical governance standard where it's about incidents and quality management systems. And also partnering with consumer standard, ensuring that we have safe patient care because reprocessing is a critical part of the patient safety program. So you need to look at those other standards and not just 3.14 and determine whether you're compliant with that or not. So the latest advisory that was put out by the Australian Commission on Safety and Quality in Healthcare, and this was put out in mid-March of this year, 2021, and they put in the advisory, they updated it because they've put in some very key dates that you need to comply with. So the first key date is assessment of your compliance. So that's your gap analysis. So by June 2021, you need to have completed a gap analysis to determine its current level of compliance. Now, a lot of people started doing their gap analysis way back in 2014, 2015, but you still need to maintain that gap analysis and have an ongoing review to determine what gaps that you currently have outstanding. Because there have been some amendments to the AS 4187. Also, by December 2021, you need to develop and document a plan to address identified gaps in compliance. So all of those gaps and risk assessments must be included in that plan, and that's by the end of 2021. The other part of the advisory talks about the separation of clean and dirty workflows. Now, the key dates for compliance for this is by the 31st of December 2022, you need to have effective segregation of clean and dirty activities. But it also must be a unidirectional work and airflow to reduce the risk of cross-contamination. You need to be able to identify and manage any risks associated with the gaps between what you have and what is required with that compliance. And then also you need to document a process map or work or flow diagram to indicate how risks of cross-contamination are being identified and managed. But with that segregation of clean and dirty activities, it does not automatically require separate clean and dirty rooms. So for an example, if you had a central sterilizing department, because of the standard requirements around air handling, and because in the standard it says that you must have a demarcated decontamination area, so you will need to have a separate area, a separate room for decontamination. The sorting, packing, and the sterilizing can be in one area. You will still get that workflow. You will still have that airflow that is required. But if you had some like a transvaginal probe done in the medical imaging department, that you're doing high-level disinfection and it's not required to have those same air handling flows that are required for a central sterilizing department, you can just have those segregation of those clean and dirty activities in a defined sort of workflow, just so that you can determine where that, if there's any cross-contamination that will occur or can occur. The other compliance or key dates is around sterile stock. Now, by the 31st of December 2022, the Commission expects organisations to comply with the requirements around the national standards and international standards for storage of sterile stock in compliant shelving. Now, compliant shelving is shelving that is able to be clean and kept free of dust. It doesn't specify that it has to be a particular type of shelving, but it just needs to be something that's able to be cleaned and kept dry and to be able to not cause any damage to any of your sterile stock. So organisations must mitigate the risk of contamination of sterile stock in that storage. And you can do that by assessing and managing the risk. And you need to have humidity and temperature monitoring on stored sterile stock. We're talking about stored sterile stock for reusable medical devices only. So that's where you need to have humidity and temperature monitoring on reusable medical devices, not consumables. That's in the standard. Now, in a lot of sterile stock rooms, and particularly in operating theatres, they co-locate those sterile reusable medical devices and also those consumables or non-sterile stock in a storage area. Now, you need to have some principles around how that can be maintained within that sterile stock room without causing damage, without causing any contamination issues, and also that they're accessible. And you also need to have the correct air handling systems with HEPA filtration and the correct air changes within those sterile stock room. And so all of those gaps at risk assessments around your sterile stock must be included in the plan. Also, the other key dates is related to equipment. So they're saying that you need to have, I don't know why I put 2021-5. It's so reprocessing. Oh, sorry, that's the standard. The latest version is version 7, which was released in March 2021. So you need to be compliant with that most up-to-date version that was released in March 2021. So what they're saying is that all compliant equipment should be operated and maintained in accordance with the manufacturer's requirements and the relevant standard, including for water quality and water quality monitoring. And so organisations must develop and use the operational procedures for this equipment that are compliant with the national and international standards. Now, the next lot of key dates in that advisory are related to water quality. So by the 31st of December 2022, they expect for accreditation that hospitals will comply with the requirements for monitoring water quality. So as you replace equipment that is used in the cleaning, disinfecting, or sterilization processes, water quality requirements should be included in the planning and risk assessment undertaken. So all of those gaps at risk assessments have to be included in the plan. Now, just a little hint around the water quality. Everybody pushes RO water. RO water sometimes will still not resolve your water quality issues. Before you install any water quality improvement mechanism, you need to understand what your water quality is first. Then the company that assesses that water quality to provide you with a system in how to improve that water quality, they will need to be very specific that their system that they're recommending and that you are going to purchase will improve your water quality. Whether that is RO water, it may be. Whether you need water filtration, maybe. Water softening treatments, maybe. Maybe you might need all of those. You will need a disinfection process, maybe. All of those things need to be considered when you're looking at improvements to water quality. Don't let any manufacturer provide you with a water quality system that is still not going to resolve your water quality issues for your equipment and what you're using in your reprocessing areas. Now, if you're unable to comply by those very specific dates provided by the Australian Commission, you can make a submission, and what they will do is consider each of those submissions on a case-by-case basis. And some of the things that they take into consideration is that you're moving into new facilities. You're not going to spend $2 million improving your existing reprocessing area when in 1 year's time you're going to be moving into a brand new reprocessing area. So it's all around those new facilities. You've got redevelopment plans in place or where you've got already planned redevelopment. So just some of the other things that you will need to comply with is that if you use a third-party provider for reprocessing, they need to provide to you evidence of their compliance with those relevant or international standards. And this will need to be documented and available for the surveyors. They will need to be certain that where you are outsourcing your reprocessing to, that they are also compliant with AS4187 and the other relevant standards. If you are the organisation where you are providing reprocessing to, so people are outsourcing to your organisation, you will also provide to them those same confidence that you are compliant with the standards. So you need to supply the evidence how you meet that standard. The advisory also states is that where visiting health professionals supply their own sterile equipment or sterile loan equipment, that you are required to seek assurance and evidence that the equipment was reprocessed, transported, and stored in compliance with the relevant national or international standards. You will need to be confident that those things have occurred to meet the standards. So for being prepared for accreditation, there are some key things that you will need to have in place. And these are, you will need to have that gap analysis that's been completed. You will have that action and implementation plan. And that plan needs to be able to demonstrate that gap analysis that was completed. You will need to have milestones documented, and you will need to track the progress, and they will need to meet those key dates within the standard. Everything needs to be have a date on it for completion. And so be very careful with those dates that they meet up with what is required within the advisory. You will also need accessible records, because anything within that action and implementation plan, they can ask you very specific information about evidence. And so you will need to be able to go in and provide that evidence, whether it's electronic or paper. And they will want to see it while they're there. So you need to have evidence within your reach. They will also want to know that there's been education of the staff, that there have been competency assessments that have been completed for staff. Also that also their quality management systems included in the education, that they understand what the quality management system is within the reprocessing area. How do you identify risks? When you identify those risks, how is that escalated, and what the communication is required when you identify a risk? They will also want to see policies, procedures, or guidelines, however you want to express those within your department. And they will want to know that you're following the manufacturer's instructions for use. And they will also need to be accessible. They may not ask the manager, they may ask the technician or the person who's doing some reprocessing. Everybody will need to know the location of all these things. Also, you will need to have a description and documentation and evidence of your tracking and traceability system. And they will want to see evidence that you're able to trace to the patient, the procedure, and also to the reusable medical device. And also some evaluation that it works. Often people will include that as part of their audit program, where they will have a specific audit to ensure that their current tracking and traceability system is actually working, and they can follow that through the patient's healthcare record. Also, you will need to have a description of what that quality management program looks like. They will want to see summaries of quality improvement projects that you've undertaken within the reprocessing area. They will also need to see validation, so all of your installation qualification, your operational qualification, and your performance qualification. And they will want to know that it's been reported to committees, that a summary of those are reported to committees, and also if there's any action required from that validation. They will also want to see service level agreements and also any additional plans that you've developed, and that might be an annual audit plan. So some of those things that they will want to see. So what does a gap analysis mean? So first of all, do you know where all your reprocessing areas are? And, we know that sometimes surveyors have actually found reprocessing areas that people didn't know existed within the facility. So the CEC have developed a couple of tools in QARS that you can use. And one is a register of reusable ultrasound probes, because their ultrasound probes have become ubiquitous in health. They're used for so many different things now. And so you will need to have an understanding about where they all are, what they're being used for, and how they're being reprocessed and how they're being stored. Also, if you're in a big organization or you want to have a look at reprocessing areas across your district or your local health district, or across your sector or your facility, there's also a register of reprocessing units and departments as well, so that you have an understanding then about what needs to be included, and particularly if you want to look at it from an LHD. These registers help you with understanding where the governance sits within these organisations. So just a quick check. I mean, you need to, ask yourself, have you assessed your compliance and performed a gap analysis for each reprocessing area within your facility? Do you know where all those reprocessing areas are? Have you completed an action and an implementation plan? Where is that action and implementation plan? Who's keeping track of their action and implementation plans on a regular basis? So if I popped into your reprocessing area today or sterilising department and I asked to see your action and implementation plan, would I have the most up-to-date plan? Now, I am also have been a private consultant, and I've performed over 100 reviews of reprocessing areas, and a number of places that I have been into, some of their action and implementation plans haven't been touched for up to 2 years, and so they weren't up to date. They had done a huge amount of work, but none of it had been documented in the action and implementation plan. And that will be a big risk when you are going for accreditation, because they will want to see the most up-to-date plan. Those plans should be risk rated, because the risk rating provides you how to prioritize what you need to work on. Also, it needs to have a timeline or milestones. It needs to be assigned responsibility, the actions, and also show progress of those actions with a date. Now, once you do those action and implementation plans, they have to be approved by the manager of the facility, and they need to have regular updates of the progress of that action plan. There's no point you writing in that you need a $10 million new reprocessing area, but the manager is unaware that that's what's been written in the plan. So just another couple of tools as well. In New South Wales, the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation, so for all those registered healthcare professionals, you know, we're talking about nurses, midwives, doctors, physiotherapists, in New South Wales is the only state or territory that has an infection control standard that sits as a legislative requirement within the regulation. And so it's under the Health Practitioner Regulation of New South Wales 2016. It's Schedule 3, Part 4, called Infection Control Standards. Now, within that standard, it actually is very specific that it requires compliance for AS 4187 and also AS 4815 as well, and particularly around all cleaning, disinfecting and sterilizing of instruments and equipment. And so there's a legislative requirement that we need compliance with both of those standards. Also, the accreditation, as we discussed, around the advisories. Now, we have had a number of facilities that when they went in to do the accreditation and the surveyors were there, they felt that the facilities didn't meet this standard, 3.14, and a number of facilities have received what they call the AC90. And that means that you've got 90 days to comply or to fix what hasn't been done. And if you fail to meet that within that 90 days, your facility will not be accredited. Also, the Australian Dental Guidelines for Infection Control, the Dental Board has some specific standards as well, and they've stated what is required for instrument reprocessing, and they state both of those standards as well. Also, you know, there's a history behind all of this. New South Wales, you know, the Department of Health developed the first audit tools in early 2000, and it was based on an audit tool that was developed by Michael Sheehan at Maitland Hospital in the late 90s. So that audit tool was transferred to the CEC in 2011 as a peer review audit, and that was on the earlier version of AS 4187. We don't have within the CEC an audit tool very specific for 4815, but there are a number of people who do have an audit tool for 4815 if anybody needs it. So let's have a look about what is a gap analysis. Now, what do you need? So the difference between what you need to have and what you do have. So that's what a gap analysis is. So when you're writing up that gap analysis, so you write down what all the gaps are, and then you need to decide how those gaps are going to be actioned and completed. Now, deciding on how they can be actioned, there are a number of different ways in which they can be actioned. So you can have a quality improvement project. You can develop up an education program. You can start writing procedures and taking photographs. You can start looking at some of the infrastructure, or even just sort of moving things around to correct workflow from dirty to clean. Oh, sorry, clean to dirty. That was a bit of a faux pas. You can have submission proposals for purchasing equipment or upgrades. So you can put in a business plan. You can have develop up service level agreements and make sure that you have those for both preventative maintenance, ongoing repairs, and also for validation. You will need to have evidence from suppliers, for example, around, water quality and compatibility with chemicals. So the evidence from the suppliers that their chemicals are compliant with your water quality. Also, you can close a gap by writing an annual education and competency assessment program. Sometimes it might be that you perform a risk assessment. You can have an action around obtaining all of the IFUs, and you might want to update those IFUs just to make sure that the ones that you have are all current and within date. Some people, because they've got no avenue where they can actually report any issues, think about, do you need to join a particular meeting so that you can report outcomes or risks, and that those things can be actioned or escalated from those meetings. Even just setting up a schedule and completing your annual validation, writing preventative maintenance plans, even performing an annual chemical audit to ensure that all of the chemicals that you're currently using are in Chem Alert. So just doing that sort of check. Also, developing up an audit program or an audit schedule, it all fits in within that quality management system. But these are sort of some of the ideas that you can use to close the gaps that you have. So the CEC have developed up a number of audit tools that you can use for looking at your gaps. So we do have one, it's a self-assessment, and it's based on the 10 sections in AS4187. And that's where it's a very detailed, and it's broken up into several audit tools because it's they look at different sections at a time. But what that will do is enable you to understand what your gaps are. Now, the peer review audit is, we've taken 25% of those self-assessment questions. And in the peer review, these are kind of the critical gaps, or the critical things that we know that you need to have in place. And it's also a verification that your gap analysis is correct. There's another audit tool there. It's called Staff Interview Observation and Assessment. And what that does, it enables you to determine your education gap analysis. So when you do that overall gap analysis, so that's about what it is that you have in place for your standard. You've had that with the peer review, it's that verification that your gap analysis is correct. And then, what you're saying is in place is being practiced down at the technical level. And so that staff interview, observation and assessment, it's a verification that what you say is being practiced. Now, when you develop up that action plan from those gaps, you will meet all of the requirements within the advisory that has been put out by the Australian Commission. It will enable you to be prepared and meet the accreditation requirement. Also, it will show how compliant you are with AS4187. Now, all of this is just to enhance your existing quality management system. So the quality management system is not starting from nothing. It's about how you move on to that sort of next bigger part of your quality management system. It also enables you to develop a number of quality improvement projects. And for those registered healthcare professionals, it indicates that there is compliance with their regulation around AS4187 and 4815. But underpinning all of that, it's about improving the safety for our patients, because that's what our intention is. And what we found with all of the compliance issues around 4187 and 4815, it's raised the profile of reprocessing staff. Now, as we discussed before, there's also those registers for ultrasound probes and the reprocessing units. All of these provide you with enough information to be able to develop up a very comprehensive gap analysis plan. So all of these tools are in QARS, but if you were looking for them externally, on the CEC website, there is the reprocessing area, and in there we've listed all of those audit tools and what is within those. So these ones here are for the CSDs and endoscopy. These ones here are for satellite sites. And these ones here are for oral and dental health services. So you can see that they're quite varied and they will meet all of your reprocessing requirements. So this just is an example of what those audit tools look like. So this is, so they have yes, no, work in progress, questions that you respond to, or it's yes, no, not applicable, or work in progress, or sometimes it's just a yes, no. So depending on the question about what it is that how you need to respond to that. Now there's always these that you can write comments in. Now I like using the comment sections in these audits. Now I've done a number of peer reviews independently. And I like using the comment sections because you can put a lot of information in there. You can provide a level of detail. You can put where the information is located. You can put links into a website or the IFUs. You can write recommendations in for yourself to put into the action plan. And also, if it's related to a policy, you can put it in the policy development date and then when it's due for review. And also, if it's, you can put link into technical specifications around certain equipment or services as well. So I put quite a lot of detail in the comment section. Because I think it's important that you don't use this as what we call a tick and flick and forget. You need all of that level of detail to be able to go back and understand what it is that why you have that gap. If you want to undergo a peer review, so there are a number of ways in which this can be done. You can ask another reprocessing manager from a hospital near you or outside of your local health district. You can ask a senior and experienced infection prevention and control consultant to come in, or you can have a combination of people as well. Also, I like the peer review process because it's almost like a mini accreditation and it gets people prepared for the types of questions and how you produce evidence and how you show your compliance. Now, completing the peer review, it's not a mandatory requirement. It's something that if you want to do that, you can do it. Some of the benefits of having a peer review is that sometimes somebody with fresh eyes coming in will see something, because when you go to work every day, sometimes you can't see any difference. Also, the having somebody come in and confirm that self-assessment, that you made all of the right decisions and you were correct in your self-assessment. What I've done with a number of my peer reviews that I've done is that it's been a great opportunity to give positive feedback about the unit or department. And there's a lot of positive things that are happening within units. People are doing extremely well. I am so proud of the technical expertise of people working within reprocessing areas. And oftentimes that independent voice giving feedback so that managers actually have confidence that things are working well within that reprocessing area. And if you have somebody who's done a number of peer reviews or been to a lot of reprocessing areas, is that sometimes you don't realize that you're doing something quite innovative that someone else recognizes that is innovative and different, and you are doing something that is quite exceptional. And sometimes that needs to be pointed out. And I've been to a number of places where I've pointed that out, and people thought that because they've always done it that way, that was normal. It may be normal for them, but if you put 25 other, like particularly central sterilizing departments together, what they are doing is unique. And so sometimes that needs to be pointed out. And also, it lets them have feedback about, that really you have a lot more in place than what you think you have. You're being very hard on yourself, particularly around their gap analysis. And also by providing that feedback to the executive is that you can sort of say that with a level of confidence that progress is on track. And also, if you are needing a little boost because you're kind of a little bit over it and you've lost momentum, it does provide a stimulus to progress that compliance by having the peer review. Now, the staff interview observation and assessment tool, I really like this tool, and I've used it quite a lot. Because it enables you to verify that your quality management programs are embedded into routine practice and procedures. It's also enables you, to understand that that people are doing the right thing, that people are very knowledgeable, that they understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and the impact if they don't do it correctly. And it makes you realize how impressive people are who work in reprocessing areas and that are technically very proficient and knowledgeable. And that's really good feedback to give to a manager, that they can be confident that their team is actually working very well and working technically proficiently, and also ensuring that there is that comprehensive quality management system around that. So you can use that audit tool monthly. You can do an annual audit. You can use it as a quick assessment for each individual staff member. You can use it as part of the peer review process, where you just go from one end to another and just you can speak to one or two staff, or you can talk to the staff as a team in how to respond to the questions. So there's lots of different ways in which that they're doing it. If you've had a complaint around a technician and you just want to do a quick sort of review, then you can do that quick assessment using that audit tool. So with satellite sites, often that they're the most challenging compliance audits. And so their satellite sites are usually located in clinical areas or outside in medical imaging or other units. And they may not have had the educational training on AS4187 and may not truly understand what other things are required within it. And they probably don't understand the implications of compliance. And so you'll often come up a number of barriers when you need that compliance around satellite sites. And oftentimes that they don't have the knowledge or the expertise to be able to do their self-assessments, and particularly understanding the technical language that's required within the standard, and then sort of applying that to what they do within their satellite sites. And the feedback that I get all the time is that the number of questions are over the top, and particularly around a single piece of equipment like a toe probe or a nasal endoscope, and they can't see why they have to have all of those in place for these simple pieces of equipment. So we do have the audit tools, as I said, that you can have a look at those. Now, with the dental clinics, when you're doing your gap analysis for your dental clinic, there's a couple of different ways in which that can be done. So you can either do it from a group of clinics, or you can do it at a single clinic level. It doesn't matter whether you do either of them, but they're both. You can just use the same audit tool, but just specify in the audit what you're looking at. So for those places, particularly I see this in a number of dental clinics, is that, should they use 4187 or should they use 4815? Just what the technical differences are is that 4187, it's not written as a procedural document. There are many links into the international and national standards that you need to have access to and be able to go to that single piece of information within a standard to be able to relate that back to AS4187. And the AS4187, it is more of a framework around governance and management, risk, quality management systems, and competency of staff. So it's written in a very technical language. Whereas 4815, it's written more as a procedural document, and it's very basic language. It is for office-based healthcare facilities to implement procedures for cleaning, disinfecting, and sterilising of reusable medical devices. So it is a much easier document to understand. So how do you decide which standard that you want to use? So these are a couple of dot points that I've just put together. So if you want to use 4815, these are just some suggestions for you in your dental clinics. It's historical. You've always used 4815. It's still a valid standard. It's still considered still up to date and relevant. It is under review, but as we know, the national standards, these Australian standards, take a considerable time until they're completed, and it is still acceptable to use 4815. Sometimes the jurisdiction or the health network requests that you use 4815 rather than 4187. Also, people like to use it because it's easier to understand and people are familiar with it. And it's very good for each individual clinic. You can't use 4815 if you were looking at a broader group of clinics. It's only really for one individual dental clinic. So, and also, if you've never performed a gap analysis before, you may want to start with 4815 before you move to 4187, because at least then you have an understanding, even from that standard, about where it is that you need to go. Why some people are using 4187 is that that's the standard that they've decided to use, and they're currently using it to develop up their gap analysis. And that same thing, you may be directed to use that standard. Some people are using it because they're transferring their dental reprocessing services to a central sterilising department. And so they need to understand, or it provides them with the level of gaps to provide the case to move their reprocessing to a central sterilising department. So it's a good sort of business sort of tool to use to understand where all your gaps are, because when they see the number of gaps that you have for 4187, and the compliance and the costs associated with that, they will often say that you need to transfer to a central sterilising department. Also, some people like to use 4187 because the audit tools are already available, and the 4815 audit tools are not readily available to everybody because only few people have them. I do have one, and I'm happy to share that if anybody wanted to contact me from this presentation. Some people prefer to also use the 4187 if they've had a number of high-risk incidents related to reprocessing in their dental clinics. And so they need to upgrade their standard because of significant incidents that they've had. Or also, if you want to look at dental clinics as a group, you'll need to use 4187. Or sometimes if you're planning to do some refurbishment or change the service requirements, you want to build a big super duper, dental super clinic or something. That's not a recommendation. That's just, if that's what is required, or you want to centralize services, then you can use 4187. So the pros and cons of using 4187, the pros are it is the most up-to-date because 4815 is 2006. The cons is that it's a very complex technical language within the document, and you do require expertise in reprocessing. If you currently outsource your reprocessing to a central sterilising department, you still will need to do a gap analysis around some of those issues that are required, like transport, storage, and education. And then, as we spoke about before, your service level agreement will require that the sterilising department is compliant with 4187, and that needs to be written in your service level agreement, and they need to provide evidence that they are compliant. So the action and implementation plan, you need to decide on what sort of template that you're going to use. Some hospitals have a very specific template, or a local health district, or your accreditation coordinator has a particular preference around an action implementation plan. You need to check also if you want separate plans for each reprocessing areas within a facility, or do you want the action implementation plan for all reprocessing areas in one facility plan. Now, my preference is for governance and tracking of what's happening within a facility around reprocessing, is that all of those gaps for all of those reprocessing areas needs to be in one facility plan. People need time to be able to complete the plan and also to keep it up to date. Also, who do you go to when you're struggling? Is it the manager, the accreditation coordinator, quality manager, or, somebody else from another facility? You also need to, when you're writing that action and implementation plan, is that you need to have information that's readily available to you to be able to look at where all those gaps are and then what it is that you need to comply with. You need to just focus on the gaps that you have. Don't focus on other things. And as you complete the actions within that gap, then you need to sort of move it to another part so that you're not having these huge action plans. So all of your completed actions and gaps need to be moved to a different section, but they need to be available. So that's why it's good to work with Excel and Excel worksheets, so that you can have a worksheet for all of the completed ones and what you're currently doing. Also be very serious about your time frames, what is achievable. And also you need to assign the responsibility by the position and not the name. Now, one piece of advice I would give to you is that once your action has been completed, and then it is moved over to kind of part of your quality management system. Don't leave it there as a gap. If something has been completed and you've embedded it into routine practice, routine education plans, or routine auditing programs or evaluation, you need to close it off and just write that's now embedded into the routine. And then you need to write that down as completed. But they shouldn't be staying there just because you're continuing to do ongoing improvement. You've finished what is required and you're continuing to tweak and make some improvements. Once that's been completed, the tweaking and improvements can be part of your routine sort of improvement processes. So I always say to people, think of your action plan as your communication tool. So if you had to take 1 year off work urgently, couldn't somebody pick it up and know exactly what is happening? Be very careful about the use of acronyms that are not part of your department language or that's acceptable. I don't know how many times I've needed an interpreter to understand what's written in action plans because there are so many acronyms. I have no idea, and even people have lost track of what they actually mean. So these are just some examples of action plans that have been done. This is one that was done across, it's a high-level plan across a local health district. This is another one here. It's got, what the audit question was, whether you were compliant, whether it's a no or a work in progress. How did you, understand where the gap came from? The risk rating, the risk category, the actions, and the responsibility. And there's some things missing from here. There are no milestones. There is no sort of ongoing sort of progress tracking of and dates of what you're doing in response to that, and there's no location of where the evidence is for that ongoing actions or where all that evidence is kept. So this one here, it looks really comprehensive and it looks like it's got a huge amount of detail in it. But in actual fact, there's a lot of information here that's not really relevant. You don't need all of these columns to say that, all of these things were, where you got it from, what sort of audit. The risk rating is really important. The thing that's, and I like this here because this is the type of risk. It's really important to understand what the type of risk are. But the same thing is that this one here has the progress of the actions, but it doesn't have milestones in here. It's got where the evidence is located. So it still looks busy, but it still is not enough for accreditation. This is another one. This is Kerry Crossy from Bathurst and Orange reprocessing areas. She's had a plan in place, action and implementation plan. She was probably one of the first to develop them up in late 2014. Hers are color coded. She works on them at least once a fortnight. But everybody understands what it means. Everybody's used to the type of plan that it is, and they all work within that plan. So this is another example, so there's all different types of ones. So these are a little bit more, how the gap was identified, the audit question, actions to be taken, milestones we need to take to complete the action. Responsibility, location of evidence, and the date completed. So at least it's got a due date and a date completed as well. So you need to sort of look at all of those things that are going to provide you with enough information for accreditation. Now, an action and a milestone. So the action is the big goal that you need to achieve. For example, writing a procedure. Now, I don't expect anybody to write this. This is just a really terrible example, but it just kind of provides you with a level of detail. And I wouldn't expect anybody to write this much around writing a procedure. But if you were writing a procedure, that's your big goal on education and training. So the milestones are the kind of all the small steps or the tasks you need to achieve that action. Like you need to seek advice from somebody on the template for the procedure. you need to review current evidence. You need to have a small working group to determine the content of the procedure. You need to write a draft. You need to send that draft out for consultation. You need to finalise and publish that procedure. Then you need to educate staff on the procedure. So that's kind of just what milestones are. They're the kind of the small steps that enable you to meet that big action or that goal. So what will the surveyors want to see? So they will need to have a look at that action and implementation plan. They will need to make sure that it's got timeframes and that they're not changed unless you have a reason, and that this is documented. It has milestones, that it's risk rated, that you're tracking the progress and documenting that in the plan, both the milestones and the actions, that you have a regular reporting function about the progress, that you've got documentation about when those risks were escalated, who they were escalated to, and the date. The plan has been approved, and as you complete those actions, you know where the evidence is to support that completed action. And some may even pick something out and ask you for evidence around that. So when you're risk rating your actions within the plan, I always use the New South Wales Health Risk Management Enterprise-wide policy because it's a very simple sort of risk matrix that provides you with enough level of detail to risk rate. So all of those actions need to be risk rated. Sometimes some of the risk rating, it's very difficult. Sometimes you can risk rate very easily. But then if you've got somebody who rates everything high, then, you know, there will probably be a level of drama around that, and maybe it's not a true representation of the risk. I would be very careful about using a high risk rating in plans, because a higher risk rating means that you have very little time in which that needs to be actioned and completed. So you will need sort of a modicum of, assessment to ensure that it's risk rated correctly. And so if you do have any moderate or high risk actions, that they do need to be escalated, they may need to be go onto a facility risk register, and there will be further discussion with the manager. And there are benefits to risk rating because it enables you to be able to prioritize those actions and also what needs to be escalated and assigning responsibility for decisions. There are some challenges with risk rating, and that's why you need somebody who understands risk management to be able to go in and to be able to help with that risk rating. Now, when you're doing it as well, I always use the risk categories as well. So I might give it, like a minor or a moderate sort of risk rating, but then I might say that it might be minor, but it has a clinical care and patient safety. Now, that might make me prioritize that over something that has a financial risk because I need to purchase equipment, but it may have a higher sort of risk category. But I may prioritize something with clinical care and patient safety over something that's a financial risk. With the escalation, it's important that when you're escalating that you understand your reporting structures and about where that information needs to go, and whether that escalation occurs in a meeting or an immediate email to managers, whether they will want to see a formal risk assessment or a formal report around that risk. And sometimes when you're particularly doing those risk assessments and reports is about understanding who your stakeholders are that you can go to. Like a lot of reprocessing managers are, their infection prevention and control consultants are very good for support and advice and assistance, and also to be able to help you to be able to articulate where that information is and then how to sort of detail that information for that escalation. But we need to be able to communicate in a way that enables action and decision making. I've seen a lot of this where it's the scattergun communication, where we put everybody on the email, and what happens is that it misses who it really needs to go to, who can action it or make a decision around it. So that the person who is responsible doesn't know that they're responsible because there are too many other people on the email, and they have no idea who's actually going to action it. So when you're communicating a risk and escalating that risk, it needs to go directly to the manager without anybody else within the organizational structure, so that they understand what they need to know and that what they need to action. So in 4187, is governance articulated or is it implied? So in 4187, it only mentions the word governance in the health service organization definition. But when you read that standard from cover to cover, it makes you understand that it's written in a framework for managing implementation, and it implies that it's a governance framework. So within that governance framework, the quality management systems and the risk management are core components within governance. So oftentimes it doesn't make that very specific, and that's why it's quite a difficult standard to understand, because it implies without being specific. So what is governance? So there's always lots of different definitions around it, but I like the one where it says that good governance is based on major characteristics that are linked to the core values. And in health, we do have core values. And for both the local health district and your organization, these should be aligned. So within that governance framework. So if we looked at, what are those characteristics that make sure that we've got a governance framework? So we need to have consistent management, so that no matter if people change, the management is consistent. We need cohesive policies and guidance and that are linked with the standards, so they all need to be saying the same thing, and that everybody understands that exactly what needs to be done. Also that people have got good processes and decision rights for a given area of a responsibility. You need to understand what you are able to decide, what you are able to spend, and where that what you can do within your given responsibility. Also, we need to have proper oversight. So, we follow all of those policies and legislation and what the requirements are to have good governance. And systems these days are very accountable. We need to understand what we're accountable for and ensure that what we're accountable for is done, and that we've got evidence of that accountability, and also that things have been done. We need to ensure that there are transparent responses and actions, so no sort of hiding behind corners and being able to make sort of, corridor decisions. We need to ensure that what those decisions and responses are transparent. And also that those decisions are consensus orientated, that everybody agrees. It's not one person saying one thing, but everybody else disagrees. And that's the sign of good leadership, is that decisions are made on consensus. And also that they're transparent, and also that they're going to be held accountable for those decisions. And also that, we have processes and systems that are effective, efficient, and equitable, so everybody's treated the same, and departments managed the same as well, that nobody's treated as lesser importance than other departments. So all of this is implied in AS 4187. But a lot of people have heard about clinical governance as opposed to the true governance. So clinical governance is the term we use to describe the systematic approach to maintaining and improving the quality of patient care within a health system. It's about the ability to produce effective change so that high quality care is achieved. And it requires clinicians and administrators to take joint responsibility to making sure that this occurs. And there's a number of frameworks. So this is one from the Australian Commission. It's a model for clinical governance. So, you know, when we've got good clinical governance, it has the potential to make positive changes to what you want to see happen. It improves the quality of care for patients. And by improving that quality of care, it provides a better experience for staff. And we need to ensure that reprocessing areas understand that it is a core patient safety function. Because unless we do the right thing with those reusable medical devices, it will severely impact on patient safety. So this is an example of a governance framework done by New South Wales Health. So this is around the state planning, and so what are the governance arrangements around that? So if you look at in relationship to reprocessing areas, yes, we have service planning that fits here. We manage our workforce and including education. We have patient safety programs, and that reprocessing sits within that clinical governance. And oftentimes it's clinical governance that are looking at the implementation of AS4187. Also that we have roles and responsibilities and performance reporting, ensuring that we have accountability. Also, we ensure compliance with standards, policies, records management, and legislation sitting here within that legal and policy requirement. Also, understanding the roles and responsibilities of our stakeholders and who we engage with. And we need to understand who are those stakeholders and what their responsibility is. Also financial management and delegation, because there's a huge expenditure in reprocessing. So what should your governance, what should it look like? So when you look at it, you follow legislative requirements like the Work Health and Safety, the Health Practitioners Regulation. So there's a list of all this, these regulations and legislation on the New South Wales Health website. We need to make sure that we have leadership that's assigned for the implementation of AS4187. And those roles and responsibilities need to be looked at, in particular around those gaps and how they're going to be actioned and completed. Also, you know, the governance is having that plan as well, the quality management system, particularly around risk assessments, education and competency and records management. Also, what is the risk management framework used in reprocessing units? And also we need to have clear outcomes so that we know that our reprocessing areas are effective and efficient. We also need to have an organisational structure that shows clear lines of reporting and accountability, and staff need to understand the reporting lines. We need a reporting structure for all of those gaps. And also we need to have very clear policies and procedures and guidelines to meet all of the requirements. And there's almost over 30, I think, policies that are required. And these will require consultation and also a sign-off process, and then that implementation and that education. And also we need to have clear position descriptions for staff working in reprocessing so they understand their roles and responsibilities, and particularly around compliance with AS4187. Now, this is for all reprocessing areas, not just for CSD or endoscopy. So how do you demonstrate it? So how your reprocessing area uses governance arrangement to contribute to the overall performance and delivery of reprocessed reusable medical devices, services, and quality programs. So that's how you link that into the governance. And also conformance is how the reprocessing area uses all of those arrangements to ensure it meets the requirements and that it meets the national standards and international standards, we have community expectations of accuracy, accountability, and openness, and particularly around those risks and incidents. So when you're looking at your organizational structures, it's good to be able to list what that organizational structure looks like. So for those reporting lines, so this is one that was developed for RPA. And so who reports to who, and then also what committees then that CSD was a member of, and what they reported at those committees. So it kind of helps people, look at those reporting lines. So you can have them for individual facilities, or you can look at them from a local health district or down to the unit level. So if you're looking at, well, what type of reports should somebody from reprocessing report to committees? I always say, always have very simple reports. They have to be simple and easy to read. One page is enough. Just some basic facts and data. And if you just need to list the risk, you don't need to write a 20-page report. Just keep it extremely simple with dot points. Also, keep a track of all the achievements for the time period, because all of these summary pages or summary reports that you put into all of these committees, it's this ongoing list of achievements, because when you go for accreditation in 3 years' time, are you going to remember all of the things that you have done? So this is one way of keeping track of your achievements over time, because oftentimes you will forget what you did at specific times. So kind of develop up a report schedule, that you have, provide a summary of your annual summary of validation, summary of your education programs and your competency assessments. 6 months, report on, the progress of what quality improvement projects that you're doing and where they're tracking. Every 6 months, put in a trend report on non-conformance and incidents. 3 months, like progress of your action plan. You can just say the percentage of actions that have been completed, or that you're on track with completing them at the specific time. If there's any risks, document them in that. And then you can have monthly incident reports and your actions taken, any new equipment and things like that, any change that's significant. So, quality management systems, and this is a big issue within the standard. So quality management systems, it's not a tick, flick, and forget. A quality management system enables the organizations to identify, measure, control, and improve the various core business processes that will ultimately lead to improved business performance. So that's from the ISO 9001 Quality Management System Standard. So what are the sorts of things within your quality management system? So things like education programs, non-conformance reports, TGA recalls, alerts, incidents and correction of errors, quality improvement projects, competency assessments, policies, procedures and reviews following IFUs, your gap analysis, it's all part of your quality management system. Your records management and tracking systems, that ensures that you've got that tracking and traceability back to that patient, to the RMD. Any risk assessments, like difficult to clean instruments, any work health and safety risk assessments, waste reduction, all of those things contribute to your quality management system. All of those daily checks, tests and cleaning that people undertake. Audit programs, all of your annual validation for your IQ, your OQ, and your PQ, preventative maintenance programs, any trials and assessments of equipment, chemicals, RAPs. If you undertake a desktop exercise, these are all included as part of your quality management system. And you need to have documentation that shows what that quality management system looks like. So a quality management system is about everything that you do in reprocessing is understood to be part of the overall quality program, and they're not separate functions or activities. And so the compliance aspects there is about enhancing what those existing quality programs are all about. So some simple ways in which you can describe or articulate your quality management system, and people have done it in various different ways. Some people like flow charts to describe it. Some people like to have like little tables that, where they write everything down, that what happens over a year. Some people like to do these schematic diagrams that look like this. This one's for a reprocessing area that they've done. But how do you then describe it, and do staff understand that all of those checks and, assessments that they do that are all part of that quality management system? And it's a good way of sort of getting the staff to understand that it's part of a bigger program. And it needs to be linked into the patient safety program. Because, is it seen as a corporate function and separate from patient safety? I don't think it should be. It should be part of the overall patient safety program. Here's one that was done for RPA Hospital, so where they looked at the KPIs, who collected it, who it was reported to, the quality management program, all of the daily checks and assessments that they do, education programs, validation and preventative maintenance, and then about quality improvement projects. These don't take very long to put together. This one took about, like 2 hours to put together. But it's just one way of sort of articulating some of those programs. Now, when you're undertaking a quality improvement project, it's a great opportunity when you have a gap is to turn it into a quality improvement project. Because it can make life very simple if you develop up like a little plan, use a different methodology, and most people use the Plan, Do, Study, Act or the PDSA, and because it has a built-in evaluation as part of it. And sometimes you can just develop up a very simple plan, but it needs to be documented if you're going to develop up a quality improvement project. And you need to be able to learn to complete simple quality improvement projects. I've been into a number of sterilising departments who have done a huge amount of work. Can they show what they did or how they did it? No, because they just got on with the business and just did it. They did it without a plan. They did it without a methodology. They also didn't have the outcome or any documentation around it, but they can demonstrate or they can tell you that they've done about 50 different improvements, but they've got nothing to show for it. So you need to develop up some simple ways in which this can be documented. Your quality accreditation managers are great because they can provide advice and help you. They can also help you to understand, that quality improvement methodology, and particularly around that PDSA cycle. Plans should be simple, like a little one-pager, putting together a little team. You can have even a team of 2. It doesn't matter. But you just need to have documentation. You need to have a reason why you're doing this improvement. So collect the data to measure before you start. It doesn't have to be a huge amount if it's a small project. But you need to be able to measure, why you did it, what happened when you started making change, and then the evaluation part at the end is about, what you did or what you improved. Don't make projects too big, break them into manageable sizes, and even very small projects need to be documented. Those ones don't need a plan, but you might just have a simple one-page summary of what you did. So think about, what sort of ones that you can share within your team, and, what did you learn from, doing it? What's the difference between just doing it and putting it into a plan? So this is one that I've used before. I always add in the national standard number so I can keep track of it, and I put that in when I save a document, I write NS 3.14 so that when I'm looking for evidence to meet that standard requirements, that I can go ahead and find that. So this you can use to record your quality improvement projects. Some people have registers and online registers that they use. But, just something really simple that you can collect all of these little one-page summaries of all of your achievements. And these things should be reported to your committees as well. All right, let's talk about risk. So what is risk management? So risk management is generally understood as a coordinated activity to direct and control an organisation with regard to risk. So the Australian standards refer to risk management is the systematic application of management policies, procedures, and practices to the activities of communicating, consulting, establishing the context, and identifying, analysing, evaluating, treating, monitoring, and reviewing risk. It's very wordy. But basically, what does all that mean? So what are the things that you demonstrate your risk management program? Well, your action and implementation is part of a risk management program, because particularly if it's risk rated, if you do risk assessments, like as we discussed with like those difficult to clean instruments. Non-conformance reports, that's all part of your overall risk management program, because in those you look at the actions and the outcomes, and then you can measure the trends over time. And you can also then look at, is the same non-conformance coming up all the time? And then that presents a risk, and then you need to follow that on with, let's put in a quality improvement project based on those risks. Any incidents that happen, so, what are the actions and outcomes? And recall procedure, are you able to do a recall, and everybody understands what that is, and, has it been tested? So just a quick recap. So quality management systems and risk are all part of the overall governance framework. I can't stress to you enough about documentation is essential, and you need to have simple methods for documenting improvements, evaluations, and reports. They need to be reported to committees and individuals, and keep those reports very simple. And it all needs to link into the national standards, because it's part of your preparation and your ongoing confidence that you're prepared for accreditation. Also, AS4187 is for all reprocessing areas. And so ensure that you understand what a critical and semi-critical RMD is. And I can't stress enough that those action and implementation plans need to be up to date. You need to set aside time every month or more to update. It makes it much easier while it's fresh in your memory than trying to remember 18 months down the track what you did in a specific time. So when we do understand risks, then we need to sort of look at then how that is communicated. So we look at, risk or crisis communication, what are the elements? So what we need to do is, first of all, we need to understand or identify what the risk is. We need to have an assessment of that risk, and it needs to be based on facts and evidence and not emotion. We need to look at how we're going to report that risk and the type of communication. And generally the managers will say to you how they like to have that any risks communicated to them. Depending on the risk, we need to be able to control it or mitigate the risk. And depending on what that is, whether that can be done immediately or whether it can be done over time. And also then what that risk level is and what that risk category should be. And those risks needs to be escalated to the right person, and then also that documentation needs of the outcomes, and particularly around that communication, those decisions, and then what the plan is to move forward. So crisis communication versus risk communication. So they're the things that go wrong versus what may go wrong. So crisis communication is when things do go wrong. So that risk communication needs to be in real time, and we need to be very proactive around identifying risks rather than reactive. So proactive is that we understand and we continually looking at things, we evaluate things. Reactive is that we haven't done something for a long time, we think we might do it, and all of a sudden we understand that we've got something there that we should have been looking at, but we didn't do it. And so then you have to react to it. Also, if there's been an incident, then it becomes a reactive risk assessment. And the level of risk needs to be based on facts and evidence, and it needs to be communicated to the right person. And then also that documentation and that reporting and that evaluation as well. And as we discussed before, that the target communication is to the right person and not that scattergun effect. So based on my experience of reviewing probably 120 reprocessing areas in the last 2 years, what have I found? So I'll just give you 2 examples. So one reprocessing area that I went to, I would classify as what I call the gold standard. They had a very well-defined organizational structure. They had involved executive. They were very knowledgeable around all of the reprocessing areas. The reprocessing manager was new AS4187 inside out, and that level of knowledge was then reproduced in all of the technicians as well who understand it. They did their gap analysis early. So in the 2015, had a very comprehensive action and implementation plan that was risk rated. Also had sensible dates in which that they need to be completed, had very good sort of communication and escalation processes. A very proactive member of various committees, and ensured that all of those reprocessing issues were tabled and understood at the various committees. Also had annual plans for what their quality program, ongoing quality program and audit program, their education and validation. Service level agreements for all preventative maintenance, whether that was all sort of outsourced, and very well structured checklists. And those checklists were actually audited and evaluated over time as well. And that's why, and that's when it becomes, it's not a tick, flick and forget. So you can have checklists, but then when you audit those checklists to make sure that things are being done, and then there's that ongoing evaluation where that is tested and to ensure that everything is done completely. And also they had very well-defined quality improvement projects. So I've been all over Australia, so these could be anywhere in Australia. I also went into other area where they used an external provider for the gap analysis, but then that wasn't then put into an action and implementation plan. And so that then became difficult to be able to understand what those gaps, everybody understood the gaps, but it wasn't documented into a plan. The sterilising manager was trained in-house, and I don't have any issues with people learning on the job, and then they work their way up. But we need to ensure that those people who are training people who are moving through into those management roles are being trained to do things correctly, and also ensure that they are compliant with the standards. They didn't have any IFUs for any of the equipment. They had very poor design and workflows. There was a number of inadequate infrastructure issues around outdated equipment, very much a tick and flick quality assurance program. And, you know, when looking at all of those checklists, there were lots of missing information, but there was no action taken against any of those. It was just an understanding that, yeah, people miss things and don't do them. There was an inadequate education program, and they had several or frequent incidents, but it wasn't documented, and non-conformance was not documented. Complaints weren't documented. There was actually very limited documentation within that reprocessing area. So when you look at it from an accreditation perspective, the person who is the gold standard, whether they turned up unannounced, they would meet the accreditation requirements, because everything that they did was always up to date and had a very well-structured program. If the one that needs a lot of work, if there was an unannounced accreditation or people coming in, would never have passed accreditation. So when you go home and start thinking about, preparing, start talking within your reprocessing areas, and start thinking about what you would, how you would document your quality management systems and how you're going to prepare for accreditation. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you got some value out of this presentation.